Reading through Herodotus' book, The Histories, I came across his references to an ancient underground structure, of which 12 kings of ancient Egypt were entombed. The very notion of 12 pharaohs, a name later attributed to the Egyptian kings through the Bible, ruling at the same time, I found to be most intriguing, as Egypt I always thought had only one king, or maybe two, one for Upper and one for Lower Egypt before the unification according to the mainstream. The chronology of Egypt is so that pharaohs have been laid out in a straight line, when in fact multiple kings ruled at the same time, but the chronology is not the focus of today. Here follows a statement from the Greek philosopher Herodotus of Halicarnassus that was written around 450 BCE. Quote, "Thus far went the records given by the Egyptians and their priests, and they showed me that from the time of the first king to that of the priest of Hephaestus, who was the last, covered 341 generations, and that in this time this also had been the number of their kings and of their high priests." Unquote. Herodotus mentions the priest of Hephaestus, who was the Greek god of fire, volcanoes, smithing and carpentry. He forged the weapons and armour of the gods, even making lightning bolts for his father Zeus, the Egyptian Amun. Hephaestus was rewarded for his works with the hand-in-marriage of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and the most beautiful goddess of them all. Here follows Herodotus' full commentary on the Labyrinth. Quote, "So far I have recorded what the Egyptians themselves say. I shall now relate what is recorded alike by Egyptians and foreigners, and shall add something of what I myself have seen. After the reign of the priest of Hephaestus, the Egyptians were made free. Egypt, however, had always had a king, so the people divided Egypt into 12 districts and set up 12 kings. These kings intermarried and agreed to be close friends, no one deposing another or seeking to possess more than another. The reason for this agreement, which they scrupulously kept to, was this: no sooner were they established in their districts when an oracle gave a prophecy to them that whichever of them poured a libation from a bronze vessel in the temple of Hephaestus would be king of all Egypt. Moreover, they decided to preserve their memory of their names by a common memorial, and so they made a labyrinth, a little way beyond Lake Maurice, and near a place called the City of the Crocodiles, or Crocodipolis. I have seen it myself, and indeed words cannot describe it. If one were to collect the walls and evidence of all the other efforts of the Greeks, the sum would not amount to the labour and cost of this labyrinth. And yet the temple at Ephesus and the one at Samos are noteworthy. Though the pyramids beg a description, and each one of them is a match for many great monuments built by the Greeks, this labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. It has 12 roofed courts with doors facing each other, 6 face north and 6 to the south, in 2 continuous lines, all within one outer wall. There is also double sets of chambers, 3,000 altogether, 1,500 above ground and the same number underground. We ourselves viewed those that are above ground and speak of what we have seen, but we learned through conversation about the underground chambers. The Egyptian caretakers would by no means show them to us, as they were, as they said, the burial vaults of the kings who first built this labyrinth, and of the sacred crocodiles. Thus we can only speak of from hearsay of the lower chambers. The upper we saw ourselves, and they are creations greater than human. The exits of the chambers and the mazy passages, hither and thither, through the courts, and were an unending marvel to us. As we passed from court to apartment, and from apartment to colonnade, from colonnades again to more chambers, and then yet into more courts. Over all this is a roof made of a stone like the walls, and the walls are covered with cut figures, and every court is set around with pillars of white stone, very precisely fitted together. Near the corner where the labyrinth ends stands a pyramid 240 feet high, on which great figures are cut. A passage to this has been made underground. Unquote. Herodotus is drawing from multiple sources here, as well as his own first-hand account. He speaks of the lower levels being out of bounds, but marvelled at the size and scale of the construction, as well as the quality of the engineering. He speaks of Lake Maurice being dug out by hand, which we shall cover later, and of the underground labyrinth, which held 3,000 chambers with a pyramid at one end. That is also mentioned by the historian Strabo 4 centuries later. Strabo was born to an affluent family from Amasya, within the borders of Pontus, which is in present-day Turkey, in around 64 BC. Here follows Strabo's reference regarding the labyrinth. Quote, "There exists still, in the nome of Herodotus, a labyrinth first built, it is said, 3,600 years ago, by King Petruchus or Tithos. The walls were constructed of Piraean marble, while the columns of the other parts were of syenite. This great mass is so solidly built that the lapse of time has been quite unable to destroy it, but it has been badly ravaged by the people of Herodotus, who have always detested it. To describe the whole of it in detail would be quite impossible, as it is divided up into regions and prefectures called nomes, 30 in number, with a great palace to each. In addition, it must contain temples of all the gods of Egypt, and 40 statues of Nemesis, in the same number of sacred shrines, as well as numerous pyramids. Banquet halls reached by steep ascents, flights of 90 steps leading down from the porticos, porphyritic columns, figures of gods and hideous monsters, and statues of kings. Some of the palaces are made so that the opening of the door makes a terrifying sound as of thunder. Most of the buildings are in total darkness. Outside the labyrinth there is a great heap of buildings called the Pterion, under which are passages leading to other subterranean places, which we shall visit later." Unquote. Interesting to note that Strabo, being the only other person I'm aware of besides Herodotus to have physically visited the underground complex and to have spoken to the priests, gives a differing account of the person who constructed the labyrinth. Perhaps if these interactions indeed happened, then the passage of time from Herodotus to Strabo, around 500 years, may have seen changes in the historical traditions of the priesthood. In 1888, Professor Flinders Petrie rediscovered the site of the Egyptian labyrinth at Hawara. Petrie was a well-established authority on archaeology, even involved with the resurrection of Stonehenge in Wiltshire, Great Britain. Petrie believed he had found enough of the original foundations had remained to enable the size and orientation of the building to be roughly determined. The labyrinth was about 304 metres long and 244 metres wide. In other words, it was large enough to hold the great temples of Karnak and Luxor. Petrie indeed claimed he had discovered the foundations of the labyrinth, when in fact it was the roof as described by Herodotus, Theodorus Siculus and Strabo. Here follows a number of the quotes from these historians in regards to the building. Herodotus, 5th century BC. "The roof is of stone, like the walls," which we mentioned before. Theodorus Siculus, 1st century BC. "This building had a roof made of a single stone." Strabo, Geography Book 17. "The wonder of it is the roofs of each chambers. They are made of a single stone." Unquote. Could it be the large stone base identified by Petrie could be a giant vaulted roof composed of a single slab of stone? Pliny the Elder, in his natural history book, also describes the labyrinth as, quote, "a bewildering maze of paths," unquote, adding that not only individuals who entered the temple have to navigate through a confusing array of ramps and porticos, rooms and stairs, but they were also confronted with a fearful noise of thunder and had to pass through the chambers in total darkness. Herodotus also claims the age of the labyrinth to be far older than him, though no records have ever been put forward of its actual construction. The engineering and construction of such an enormous project could go back to the golden age of Zep-Tepe, to which was a time when Egypt was still ruled by the gods, and monuments such as the pyramids are theorized to have been built. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato also attributed to the popularization of Egypt in his writings. He told about the connection of the mysterious priests of the pharaohs with the mythological civilization of Atlantis. More recent attempts to discover the lost labyrinth have been made. The archaeological survey from around February-March 2008, after receiving permission from the Supreme Council of Antiquities of Egypt, headed up by the then Dr. Zahi Hawass, who we shall come back to later. A team of georadar specialists from the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geography, or NRIAG, conducted extensive testing in the area identified by Flinders Petrie more than a century earlier. What the surveys revealed was pretty informative. The scanned area showed indication of a vast number of chambers and walls, several meters thick. Below a huge stone slab at a depth of 8 to 12 meters, they found a grid structure of gigantic size, made of very high resistivity material, such as igneous rock or granite. The geophysics research confirmed the presence of archaeological features consistent with the description of the lost labyrinth of Egypt, and confirmed Petrie's earlier archaeological work. The findings of this expedition, called the Matterhorn Expedition, were published in the fall of 2008 Scientific Journal of the NRIAG, and the results were exchanged in a public lecture at Ghent University in October of 2008, in the presence of the Belgian press. However, it was not long after that the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt put a stop to all communications of the findings, due supposedly to Egyptian national security. Louis de Cordier, the lead researcher on the expedition, waited 2 years for the Supreme Council to make the findings public, but by June 2010 it became clear that they had no desire to do so. Thus de Cordier launched his own website, Labyrinth of Egypt, in order to publicly post the results of this significant research project. The water table has risen in the area due to damming of the Nile, causing the water from the seasonal flooding to inundate the area of the labyrinth. All we can do is hope excavations can be launched in the future in order to save and fully explore this ancient wonder.